the sports injuries. I've actually going to talk about a more personal injury that I've had in my years of playing football and basketball and stuff. It was I had a hip a flexor strain. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know if you've ever heard. Pretty sure you have.
Yeah.
I've had that strain before, and I'm just, that's not common on the average person every day. It's mainly an injury that happens with people who are, contact sports and football and some basketball, because you're jumping up and you're putting 225 pounds slamming on the floor real hard, and that strain really is painful. So, how is there anything that's available now that could help and prevent those type of strains from happening that's in the market today?
First of all, thank you for having me, Francis, and it's a pleasure to entertain your questions, Ricardo.
Okay.
Basically, when we're talking about strains and sprains and things like that, one of the best preventative measures is a great diet, and also proper stretching and warm-ups and cool downs. And sometimes we underestimate the value of warming up and cooling down, which is extremely important, because getting the tendons and ligaments and the muscles pliable and flexible, it will prevent injuries. So that's number one. And then once you do have an injury, by whatever act of God or whatever reason, whether it's just whether it's an improper warm up, or whether it's just too much strain for whatever reason, there are ways of dealing with it with stem cell therapy, or your own growth factors from your own blood, which literally goes back and regenerates the damaged tissue, whether it's a tendon or a ligament or a muscle or a meniscus or the cartilage. So there is a whole world of regeneration with your own stem cells, or even with endometrial stem cells.
Awesome, cool. You mentioned something about the meniscus and which is the lower part of the body. Let's talk more about another common injury that I know about very well, is the ACL tear.
Oh yes. Yes, anterior cruciate ligament. That's a very common one in sports.
Yep.
Ricardo, thank you for mentioning that one. That's a very common one in sports. And what tends to happen is, if it's a partial tear, stem cells can take care of it very easily. If it's a full tear, it is very likely that surgery would be in order to mend it, and then stem cells can take over from there. So in both cases, stem cells play a huge role, because the partial tear can be completely regenerated with stem cells, and then a full tear, there would need to be some surgical intervention at first, and then the stem cells take over to make it as good as new. A lot of people that go into surgery with a full tear, it is very common that they can't play the same way again, or whether it's a sports injury or but with the stem cells, we can get them back to the pre-injury point. So it's extremely effective in when I say regeneration, I'm talking about building and constructing the tissues back to pre-injury state. Okay, and so it's very pre-wear and tear state. So it is very effective in doing that, the stem cells.
Awesome. There is also speaking of the two injuries that I know personally about, the psychological aspect of that. How will we work if the body, once the body repairs itself, or if it's done through the stem cell or any other therapeutic medicines that are out there, mentally, you still never forget, even today. And I don't play hard sports. actually 100 pounds over where I used to be anyway. Even going up the steps and up and down the steps, I always think, oh my God, I might tear my ACL again. I might have this hip spring again. Like, how do we get around that in the mental of things, the longevity effects after the trauma has happened physically, the mental trauma?
That is such a great point, Ricardo, because in our treatments at Stem Cell Healing Institute, we are so comprehensive in our approach and in our treatment. And that is that we take into account that psychological and emotional aspect of healing. And so we deal with it through guided imagery, visualization. We do even other cathartic type of exercises, so that there is a way to get around that. And it's just about being conscientious and healing through the mind and body, not just physically, right? Because it's such a comprehensive thing. Healing our body is not just our physical body. It's about healing our mind and our psyche, and like I said, using guided imagery and visualization, and going through those movements and activities and exercises in our mind, and doing them successfully in our mind, in order for us to be able to manifest them physically. And so that we take all of that into account.
Right. Cool. Yeah, because it's always a issue. You always think when it's raining or it's snowing on the ice, and you say, "Oh, all it takes is one little slip, and then maybe it's going to tear again." And as we get older, and we're not as athletic as we used to be, as I used to be, let's say that, and I always think like, oh man, if I take an injury like that now, it's gonna be even worse. It's right. Really a mental thing, and I really would one day want to get past that. But so I'm glad you shared that information with us.
Yes, I know you always feel vulnerable after an injury. And so yeah, that's a very good point. And one, the positive aspect about that, Ricardo, is that it makes you more aware about, okay, I better do a proper warm up. I better do a proper cool down. I better make sure I'm flexible. And all of those things are good for you in the long run, no matter what, whether or not you have an injury. So it's good because it keeps you aware and more conscious.
I have one other one that I can think of. That's a big one. It's been the topic in the news. It's been the topic of the talk shows. It's been country to country, from the FIFA field to the NFL to MLB to hockey, even all the way down to Little League, is something that's been troubling most athletes. If you play football, any contact sports, you've had this, is the concussion.
Oh, yes.
How does your treatment able to deal with the concussions? Is there something out there?
You know what, Ricardo, you really touched on a point that we hardly ever mention in sports, because we think about physical injuries being a knee or a shoulder or a hip or a groin or something like that. And this is very, very, very common, but it's very rarely talked about. And you're right, a head injury in sports or in whatever case. Now, stem cells have been extremely effective in concussions, in brain injuries, in any sort of central nervous system injuries, nerve injuries. What is a concussion, first of all? Perhaps we should just make it clear with the audience and define it. Basically, a concussion is when the head has an impact to the point to where the brain actually sort of moves inside the skull, and has an impact with the skull inside of the skull. And so the brain actually hits the inside of the skull. And it may not result in anything, there may not be any internal bleeding. There may not be anything else physical that they can find in say an MRI or a CT scan, but just the impact of the brain inside of the skull has an impact on whatever it may be: memory, concentration, vision, and it can happen in the long run, or somebody can pass out, and in the long run there are long-term ramifications. So what we do is, with the stem cells, we apply them in two different modes. We apply the stem cells IV, intravenously, with a natural sugar called mannitol, so that it can penetrate the blood-brain barrier. And we also apply the stem cells through the nose, intranasally. We call it intranasal aspiration. And what that does is it allows the stem cells to bypass the blood-brain barrier in a physical way, again, in getting right into the brain. And what that does is, whatever damage has occurred with the impact, so when the brain actually hits the inside of the skull, there is some loss of neurons, and there is some loss of cells. And so what the stem cells do is it helps to regenerate those neurons and the brain cells that have been damaged, and to literally rebirth that damage. So it would be a different approach. So with physical injury, we inject right into the knee, or the foot, or the shoulder, or the elbow. In this case, we inject into the blood, where the stem cells will flow with mannitol, and directly into the central nervous system with the intranasal aspiration. So it's very direct. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you gave me a lot of information, and I do appreciate that. And I know I said that was my last one, but I do have another one that just popped in my mind. And I now, because I am a golfer, I call it the golf's elbow, but most people know it as the tennis elbow.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Yes. And so you're wondering if that can be impacted with stem cells. And you know what? It's a very I'm actually suffering from it myself.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I'm an avid. I don't play golf, but I'm an avid. I do a lot of HIIT and CrossFit and that kind of thing. So I'm suffering from tennis elbow right now, and I would tell you that it's probably not so extreme for a stem cell treatment, but for sure, growth factors from your blood and from your platelets. We call it platelet lysate treatment. Okay, so maybe a couple of platelet lysate treatments, and basically what that is we take the stem cells, we take the platelets from your own blood, and they're isolated in order to inject back only the growth factors and not the platelets. So it's very different from PRP treatment, which is very commonplace now. PRP is platelet-rich plasma. And it is actually very inflammatory, and it's not as concentrated and as effective as platelet lysate. So platelet lysate is one step closer to stem cell treatment. And so that is what we isolate the growth factors, and we inject back only the growth factors and none of the cellular components that can be so inflammatory. And so that is the treatment I would recommend for you, my friend.
Awesome.
Is maybe a couple of platelet lysate treatments 2 weeks apart, and it's not very common in the U.S. and Canada. So that treatment, PRP is much more common, but you need a lot more PRP treatments compared to the platelet lysate because of the concentration that we get with platelet lysate.
Awesome.
So you're going to have to visit me in Guatemala.
No problem. No problem. Really great.
Yeah, I think that most of the, and I apologize to being so quiet, but in every sport, we talk about this in one of the previous episodes. The tear and wear, it's extremely high, especially when you're doing 8 hours of exercise, continuous and rigorous exercise, and professionals actually go like on those things. And people don't realize that. I mean, it seems like it's so easy. I mean, they only see the benefits of, I can become a professional player, or I can go like that. And then the body is the one, I mean, that starts asking them different things.
Right, exactly. Your body starts to talk to you. And yeah, that's a very good point, yes.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sarah. Thank you, Ricardo, for this wonderful episode. I think that we gained
Yes.
a lot of knowledge today. And the best thing is that if people wants to get a treatment, not only the treatment, the normal treatment, like surgery or things like that, but getting better again and feeling like it was from before, they can actually contact you. They can visit your website. They can actually set an appointment to visit Guatemala and actually get a consultation.
Absolutely, and not invasive, right? There's no surgery involved with curing and healing the body with stem cells. So it's just it's incredible. It's incredible.
Excellent. Well, appreciate your time to both, and I hope to talk to you guys
Thank you.
next
Thank
week.
you so much.
Thank you as well. Appreciate it as usual.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.